Most people think they are tired because they work too hard. But what if the real reason is something far more disturbing? What if your brain has been running on the wrong operating system your entire life, and nobody ever gave you the manual? Think about your typical morning. Your alarm goes off. Your body feels heavy. Your mind is already crowded with unfinished tasks, notifications, and worries about the day ahead. You reach for your phone, scroll for a few minutes, drink coffee just to feel normal, and somehow, before the day even begins, you already feel behind. Now compare that with a different kind of morning. You wake up before your alarm. Your mind is quiet, clear. Ideas appear easily. Problems that felt impossible yesterday suddenly have solutions. Your focus feels effortless, almost automatic. You move through the day with energy, clarity, and momentum. Here is the strange part. These two experiences do not belong to different people. They belong to the same brain, operating under different conditions. The difference is not intelligence, it is not discipline, and it is definitely not motivation. The difference is understanding how your brain actually works. Your brain is the most powerful biological system on Earth. It contains around 86 billion neurons, forming trillions of connections, constantly processing information, predicting outcomes, regulating emotions, and generating ideas. Yet most people spend their entire lives using it blindly. Imagine being given the most advanced machine ever created, but never receiving the instruction manual. You press random buttons. Sometimes it works, sometimes it crashes, and when it fails, you blame yourself. That is exactly how most people treat their minds. They try to force focus when the brain needs recovery. They chase motivation when the brain requires emotional alignment. They multitask even though the brain was never designed to do it. They sacrifice sleep to gain time, while unknowingly destroying the system responsible for productivity. But here is the truth. Your brain is not broken. It is not lazy. It is simply following rules. Biological rules, neurological rules, rules shaped by millions of years of evolution. And once you understand those rules, something incredible begins to happen. Productivity stops feeling like a fight. Focus becomes easier. Energy becomes stable. Creativity appears naturally. Instead of constantly pushing your brain harder, you begin working with it. In the next few minutes, you are going to discover 8 brain rules that change how your mind performs. You will learn why sleep is actually the most powerful productivity tool you have, why movement sharpens thinking, why multitasking quietly destroys focus, why stress shuts down creativity, why repetition rewires your mind, why your brain remembers images far better than words, why emotions control your actions far more than logic, and why taking breaks may be the most productive thing you can do. But there is something important you should know before we continue. Once you understand these rules, you cannot unsee them. You will start noticing patterns in your own behavior. You will see exactly why some days feel powerful and others collapse into distraction. And that awareness changes everything. Because once you understand how your brain actually works, you have a choice. Keep operating the same way you always have, or begin playing by a completely different set of rules. And if you are still listening right now, I have a feeling you already know which path you are ready for. So let's begin with the most underestimated rule of them all. Not motivation, not discipline, sleep. Because before your brain can perform at its highest level, it must first reset itself completely. And most people have been skipping that reset for years. Before we dive in, take a second to hit that like button and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. You might be surprised to find someone listening from the same place as you. Chapter 1. Sleep, the brain's reset button. Let me take you back to a moment that has probably happened to you many times. You wake up in the morning, but something feels off. Your eyes open, yet your mind refuses to follow. Thoughts move slowly, like they are trying to push through thick fog. You lie there for a few seconds, already aware of the long list of things waiting for you today, but your body feels heavy, almost reluctant to begin. You get up anyway. Coffee becomes the first solution, then maybe another cup later. You sit down to work and quickly realize something strange. Words blur together. Ideas feel distant. You read the same sentence 2 or 3 times and still struggle to absorb it. Simple decisions take longer than they should. Your patience is thinner. Your emotions are closer to the surface. And it is only 9 in the morning. Now compare that with a different kind of day, a morning where you wake up naturally, sometimes even before the alarm. Your mind feels clear and alert. Thoughts arrive easily. Problems that seemed complicated yesterday now appear simple. You move through your tasks with quiet efficiency. Your attention stays steady. Conversations feel easier. Creativity appears without forcing it. It almost feels like you have become a different person overnight. In a way, you have. The difference between these two versions of you is not motivation. It is not discipline. It is not even intelligence. The difference is sleep. Sleep is often misunderstood. Many people imagine sleep as a passive state, a period when the brain shuts down and rests. But the reality is far more fascinating. When you fall asleep, your brain does not stop working. In many ways, it begins performing some of its most important tasks. Imagine your brain as a busy city during the day. Traffic moves constantly. Information flows through billions of neural connections. Decisions are made, emotions are processed, memories are formed, and problems are solved. Just like any city, activity creates clutter. Signals accumulate. Waste products build up. The system becomes overloaded. Now imagine what happens when night arrives. The streets empty. Maintenance crews come out. Roads are repaired. Debris is cleared away. Files are reorganized. Systems are recalibrated so the city can function smoothly again the next day. Sleep performs the same role for your brain. During deep sleep, your brain begins a process of neurological maintenance that scientists are still discovering in greater detail. One of the most important systems involved is called the glymphatic system. This system acts like a cleansing network, flushing out metabolic waste that accumulates in the brain during waking hours. Without this nightly cleaning process, those waste products remain and begin interfering with cognitive function. But cleansing is only part of the story. Sleep is also when your brain organizes memory. Every experience you had during the day is evaluated. Important information is stored. Irrelevant information is discarded. Emotional experiences are processed and integrated. Neural connections that matter are strengthened, while unnecessary ones weaken. It is a process of biological refinement. Your brain is literally restructuring itself while you sleep. Neuroscientists call this process neural consolidation. The learning you experience during the day only becomes stable after sleep strengthens those pathways. Without sufficient sleep, the brain struggles to convert short-term experiences into long-term knowledge. This means that sleep is not separate from productivity. Sleep is productivity. It is the hidden foundation beneath your ability to focus, learn, remember, and create. But modern culture has developed a strange relationship with sleep. We treat it like a luxury, something optional, something we sacrifice when work becomes demanding. Many people wear exhaustion like a badge of honor, proudly declaring how little sleep they need. Yet biology does not negotiate. When sleep is reduced, the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making, reasoning, and self-control, begins to lose efficiency. Reaction times slow. Emotional regulation weakens. Creativity declines. Even your ability to interpret social cues becomes less accurate. After just one night of poor sleep, cognitive performance can drop significantly. After several nights of reduced sleep, the brain begins adapting to the impairment. You may feel like you are functioning normally, but objective measurements show that your mental performance has declined dramatically. This phenomenon is known as performance adaptation. You become used to operating at a lower level without realizing it. It is like gradually dimming the lights in a room. At first, the darkness is obvious, but over time, your eyes adjust, and you forget how bright the room once was. Many people live their entire lives under that dimmed light. They assume fatigue is normal. They assume mental fog is part of adulthood. They assume the struggle to focus is simply who they are. But when sleep improves, something remarkable happens. Clarity returns. Ideas connect faster. Memory strengthens. Emotional stability improves. Problems become easier to analyze because the brain's executive systems are functioning properly again. In other words, the version of you that feels sharp, calm, and capable is not a rare state. It is your brain operating as it was designed to. There is also a deeper principle at work here. Sleep is not only a biological reset, it is a neurological rhythm that synchronizes the mind with the body. Your circadian system regulates hormones, temperature, metabolism, and alertness through cycles of light and darkness. When this rhythm is respected, the brain operates with remarkable precision. When it is constantly disrupted by late nights, screens, irregular schedules, and stress, the entire system begins drifting out of alignment. You feel it as fatigue. You experience it as distraction. You interpret it as lack of motivation. But beneath those symptoms lies something simple. Your brain did not receive the reset it needed. The most successful thinkers, creators, and performers understand this principle deeply. They do not treat sleep as the leftover time after work. They treat it as the preparation that makes great work possible. Because a rested brain is not merely more alert. It is more intelligent. It sees patterns faster. It regulates emotion better. It generates creative insight more easily. In short, it becomes the tool you always wished you had. So, before you search for productivity systems, motivational strategies, or complex routines, begin with the simplest rule of brain performance. Protect your sleep, because every night your brain offers you the same gift, a complete reset. The question is whether you allow it to happen. And once you understand that, the next rule becomes easier to accept. Because after your brain resets itself, it needs something else to truly come alive. Movement. Chapter 2. Movement. Activate the thinking brain. There is a moment that almost everyone has experienced. You are sitting at your desk, staring at your screen, trying to focus on a task that should not be difficult. But something feels wrong. Your thoughts move slowly. Your eyes drift across the same lines again and again without absorbing meaning. Even simple decisions feel strangely exhausting. Your brain feels heavy. The instinctive solution most people reach for is stimulation. Another cup of coffee, a quick scroll through social media, maybe a snack, something to push the mind back into motion. But there is another solution that works far more reliably, even though it feels counterintuitive in the moment. Stand up, move, walk across the room, stretch your body, step outside for a few minutes. Let your heart rate rise slightly and your breathing deepen. Within a short time, something subtle begins to change. The mental fog starts to lift. Thoughts feel sharper. Your attention stabilizes. You return to your work and realize the problem was never the task. The problem was stagnation. Your brain is not designed to operate in isolation from the body. It evolved within a system of movement. For hundreds of thousands of years, human thinking happened while walking, climbing, hunting, gathering, building, exploring. Motion and cognition developed together. When the body moves, the brain receives signals that something important is happening. Blood flow increases. Oxygen delivery rises. Nutrients reach neural tissue more efficiently. The entire nervous system becomes more alert. This is not metaphor. It is physiology. Within minutes of moderate physical movement, several neurotransmitters begin circulating through the brain. Dopamine increases, improving motivation and goal-directed behavior. Serotonin rises, stabilizing mood and emotional balance. Norepinephrine heightens alertness and attention. These are the same chemical systems that many medications attempt to influence, but the body can generate them naturally through movement. This means exercise is not simply about strengthening muscles or improving cardiovascular health. It is a direct intervention into brain chemistry. Movement literally changes the state of your mind. Researchers studying brain imaging have observed something even more remarkable. Individuals who engage in regular physical activity develop measurable structural changes in key brain regions. The hippocampus, responsible for memory formation and spatial awareness, becomes more robust. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning, reasoning, and self-control, shows improved efficiency. In simple terms, regular movement strengthens the physical architecture of the brain. Another crucial molecule appears during exercise called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, often abbreviated as BDNF. Scientists sometimes describe BDNF as fertilizer for the brain. It encourages the growth of new neural connections and helps existing neurons communicate more effectively. Without sufficient BDNF, the brain struggles to adapt and learn. With it, neural networks become more flexible and resilient. This is one reason why some of the most creative thinkers throughout history built movement directly into their routines. Charles Darwin famously walked the same thinking path every day while developing his theories. Steve Jobs often conducted important meetings while walking. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote that all truly great thoughts are conceived while walking. They were not simply exercising their bodies, they were activating their minds. Yet modern life has slowly separated thinking from movement. Many people spend the majority of their day seated, working inside environments that restrict physical activity. Over time, this stillness creates a subtle cognitive stagnation. Energy decreases, attention weakens, creativity feels distant. It is not because the brain is incapable of producing ideas. It is because the system that fuels the brain has been placed in idle mode. Movement is the ignition. There is also a psychological dimension to this process. When the body moves rhythmically, the brain enters patterns that allow deeper cognitive processing. Walking, running, cycling, or even stretching can stimulate subconscious problem solving. Ideas that felt blocked while sitting suddenly begin to connect. Many people report experiencing their clearest insights during walks, showers, or other moments when the mind is relaxed, but the body is active. This is the brain's default mode network activating. When focused effort temporarily relaxes, background neural systems begin integrating information in new ways. Solutions appear, not because you forced them, but because your brain finally had the conditions to produce them. Movement also provides an outlet for emotional energy. Stress hormones, such as cortisol and adrenaline, accumulate during demanding situations. When the body remains still, those hormones continue circulating through the system, sustaining feelings of tension and anxiety. Physical movement allows the body to metabolize these chemicals and return the nervous system toward equilibrium. You may have noticed that a short walk during a stressful day can dramatically shift your emotional state. It is not coincidence. It is chemistry. One of the most important insights about movement is that it does not require extreme intensity to produce benefits. You do not need marathon training or elaborate gym routines for the brain to respond positively. Moderate, consistent activity can deliver profound cognitive improvements. A brisk 20-minute walk can increase alertness. Gentle stretching can release accumulated tension. Climbing a few flights of stairs can awaken circulation and sharpen attention. What matters most is regular engagement. Movement reminds your brain that the organism is alive and active, and when the brain senses that activity, it allocates energy differently. It prepares you to think clearly, respond quickly, and engage with your environment. The modern world often encourages us to treat the mind as if it exists separately from the body. But in reality, the brain and body are inseparable partners in every thought you have. When the body is stagnant, the mind slowly becomes stagnant as well. When the body moves, the mind begins to awaken. So the next time you feel mentally stuck, exhausted, or unable to concentrate, resist the instinct to sit longer and force your attention. Instead, stand up. Move your body. Give your brain the signal it has been waiting for. Because once the brain receives oxygen, blood flow, and chemical activation through movement, something remarkable begins to happen. Your thoughts sharpen, your focus stabilizes, your creativity returns, and suddenly, the work that once felt impossible becomes surprisingly simple. Chapter 3. Focus. One task, one mind. Let me show you a scene that has quietly become the default experience of modern work. You sit down with a clear intention. There is something important you want to accomplish. A document to write. A problem to solve. A project that requires real thinking. You open your computer and begin. A few seconds later, a notification appears. Just a quick message. You respond quickly and return to your work. Then another tab opens. Something you need to check. A piece of information related to the task. While that page loads, your phone vibrates. Just a quick glance. You scroll for a moment. Then another. Suddenly, 15 minutes have passed. You return to your work again, slightly irritated. You begin reading the same paragraph you started earlier. Your attention drifts again. You open another tab. Now there are 10 open, then 15. At the end of the day, you feel exhausted. You were busy all day. But when you look back, you realize something uncomfortable. Very little actual work happened. This experience is so common that most people assume it is simply the normal way modern work functions. But neuroscience tells a very different story. Your brain cannot multitask. It feels like it can. It feels like you are doing several things at once, but biologically that is impossible. The brain can only place conscious attention on one cognitively demanding task at a time. What we call multitasking is actually something else entirely. Rapid task switching. Your attention jumps from one task to another, then back again, then somewhere else entirely. Each time the brain switches, it must reorient itself. It must remember what the previous task was, reconstruct the context, and then attempt to resume where it left off. This process consumes mental energy. Researchers call this the switching cost. Even brief interruptions carry a hidden cognitive price. When attention is pulled away from a task, it can take several minutes for the brain to fully regain its previous level of focus. Multiply that cost across dozens or even hundreds of small interruptions throughout the day, and the result is staggering. Studies suggest that constant task switching can reduce productivity by as much as 40%, but the damage goes deeper than efficiency. Multitasking trains your brain to become fragmented. Attention behaves like a muscle. When you constantly interrupt your own concentration, you are conditioning your brain to expect novelty and stimulation. Deep thinking becomes uncomfortable because your brain has learned to seek constant variation. Over time, the ability to sustain attention weakens. This is why many people struggle to read for extended periods, write complex ideas, or engage deeply with a single task. Their brains have been trained to operate in shallow bursts of attention. But there is another way to work, a state that scientists call deep focus. Deep focus occurs when the brain directs its full cognitive resources toward one demanding activity. Distractions disappear, internal chatter quiets, time begins to move differently. You become absorbed in the task itself. Many people have experienced this state without realizing what it was. Writers sometimes describe it as words flowing effortlessly. Programmers refer to it as being in the zone. Artists experience it when hours pass without noticing the clock. Psychologists often refer to this state as flow. Flow is not simply a pleasant mental experience. It is one of the most productive cognitive states the human brain can achieve. During flow, multiple brain systems synchronize. Attention becomes stable. Working memory functions efficiently. Creative networks connect ideas rapidly. You are thinking at your highest capacity. But flow requires one crucial condition: undivided attention. The brain must feel safe enough from interruption to invest its full resources in the task. If notifications, messages, or potential distractions remain nearby, a portion of your attention remains alert for those signals. Even if you do not consciously check them, the brain keeps monitoring. This invisible vigilance drains cognitive energy. The solution is surprisingly simple but often uncomfortable at first. Single tasking. Choose one task. Close everything else. Silence notifications. Remove the phone from your immediate environment. Create a small window of time where your brain knows there is only one thing to do. At first, this can feel difficult. If your mind has been trained for constant stimulation, the absence of novelty may feel strangely uncomfortable. You may feel the urge to check something, open another tab, or briefly switch tasks. That urge is not weakness, it is conditioning. Your brain is simply responding to the patterns it has practiced. But something remarkable happens if you remain with the task long enough. The discomfort fades. Your attention stabilizes. Thoughts begin connecting more smoothly. Ideas deepen. The work itself becomes more engaging because your brain is finally investing its full capacity. Instead of scattering energy across multiple shallow activities, your mind begins producing meaningful progress. A single hour of uninterrupted focus can accomplish more than an entire day of fragmented effort. This principle has been observed across many disciplines. Writers, engineers, scientists, musicians, and entrepreneurs all share one common habit when performing their most meaningful work. They protect periods of deep focus, not because they are more disciplined than others, but because they understand something simple. Attention is the most valuable cognitive resource you possess. Every time you direct it fully towards something important, you create the conditions for mastery. Every time it is scattered across distractions, your potential fragments with it. The modern world is designed to compete for your attention. Notifications, messages, endless streams of information, all of them attempt to capture your awareness, because attention has become one of the most valuable currencies in the digital economy. But your mind does not have to participate in that chaos. You can choose where your attention goes, and that choice determines the quality of your thinking. When attention becomes focused, the brain becomes powerful, problems become clearer, ideas develop more fully. Decisions improve because the mind has the space to analyze information properly. Focus is not a rare talent reserved for a few individuals. It is a trainable skill. And like any skill, it strengthens through practice. Each time you complete a period of uninterrupted work, you strengthen the neural circuits responsible for sustained attention. Over time, those circuits become more efficient. Concentration becomes easier. Your brain learns that depth is more rewarding than distraction. So the next time you sit down to work, remember a simple principle. One task, one mind. Because when attention stops fragmenting and begins concentrating, something extraordinary happens. Your mind finally begins operating at the level it was designed for. And once you understand the power of focus, the next rule becomes impossible to ignore, because even the most focused mind can be completely disrupted by something else. Stress. Chapter 4. Stress, when the brain enters survival mode. There is a moment that many people know well, especially at night. You lie in bed exhausted. Your body wants sleep, but your mind refuses to cooperate. Thoughts begin circling endlessly. Conversations replay. Mistakes feel larger than they were. Tomorrow's responsibilities multiply in your imagination. Your heart beats a little faster. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your muscles tighten, even though you are lying still. Nothing dangerous is happening around you. Yet your body reacts as if a threat is present. This is stress. Stress is often described as an emotional experience, something psychological that happens inside the mind. But biologically, stress is much more than a feeling. It is a full-body survival response that evolved to protect you in moments of danger. Thousands of years ago, this response saved human lives. When early humans encountered predators or physical threats, the brain needed to react immediately. There was no time for careful reasoning or slow analysis. The brain activated the amygdala, a small structure deep within the limbic system that functions as an alarm signal. Once triggered, the amygdala initiated a cascade of biological changes. Adrenaline surged through the bloodstream. Cortisol levels increased. Heart rate accelerated. Breathing intensified. Blood flow shifted away from systems that were not immediately necessary, such as digestion, and redirected toward the muscles. The body prepared itself to fight or run. This reaction is known as the fight-or-flight response, and it is extraordinarily effective when facing physical threats. It sharpens awareness and mobilizes energy instantly. The problem is that the brain cannot easily distinguish between physical danger and psychological pressure. A predator in the forest triggers the same system as a stressful email. A life-threatening situation activates the same circuitry as a looming deadline. An argument or social conflict produces a similar response. In the modern world, these perceived threats occur constantly. Deadlines accumulate, messages arrive, expectations increase. News cycles amplify uncertainty. The brain begins activating stress responses repeatedly throughout the day. Instead of brief bursts of survival energy, the nervous system remains in a prolonged state of alertness. This is what scientists call chronic stress. And chronic stress changes how the brain functions. When stress hormones remain elevated, the prefrontal cortex begins to lose efficiency. This area of the brain is responsible for higher cognitive functions, such as planning, rational thinking, impulse control, and decision-making. In stressful conditions, blood flow shifts away from this region and toward survival systems. The brain prioritizes immediate reaction instead of thoughtful analysis. You may have noticed this in your own life. During stressful moments, decisions feel rushed. Small problems feel overwhelming. You may say things you later regret or struggle to think clearly about situations that normally seem manageable. This is not a failure of character. It is a biological shift in brain function. Chronic stress also affects memory. The hippocampus, which plays a crucial role in forming and retrieving memories, becomes sensitive to prolonged exposure to cortisol. Over time, elevated stress hormones can impair the brain's ability to store and recall information effectively. This is why learning new material becomes more difficult during periods of intense stress. Creativity suffers as well. Creative thinking requires the brain to explore possibilities and connect ideas in flexible ways. Stress narrows attention. Instead of exploring possibilities, the brain focuses on immediate threats. Imagination shrinks. Problem-solving becomes reactive rather than innovative. Perhaps the most subtle effect of chronic stress is emotional fatigue. When the nervous system remains in constant alert mode, the capacity to handle new challenges decreases. Small inconveniences trigger larger reactions. Minor frustrations feel overwhelming. Emotional resilience weakens. Over time, this heightened state begins to feel normal. Many people live in a constant low-level state of stress without realizing it. They wake up tense. They move through the day carrying invisible pressure. They lie down at night still holding the same tension they carried in the morning. The nervous system never fully resets, yet stress itself is not the enemy. In moderate amounts, stress can enhance performance. It can sharpen attention, increase motivation, and help individuals rise to challenges. Psychologists sometimes describe this optimal range as productive stress. The key difference lies in duration. Short bursts of stress can be beneficial. Continuous stress becomes toxic. Managing stress is not about eliminating it entirely. That would be impossible. Instead, it involves learning how to regulate the nervous system so that stress responses activate when necessary and deactivate when the situation passes. The brain needs signals of safety. One of the most powerful signals comes from something deceptively simple: breathing. Slow, controlled breathing directly influences the autonomic nervous system. When you inhale slowly through your nose and exhale gradually through your mouth, the brain receives a message that the environment is safe. Heart rate decreases. Muscles begin relaxing. Stress hormones gradually decline. This shift from alertness toward calm is sometimes called activating the parasympathetic nervous system. Movement also helps regulate stress. When the body experiences a surge of adrenaline but remains physically still, the nervous system stays activated. Physical activity allows the body to metabolize stress hormones and return toward balance. Even a short walk can significantly reduce stress levels because it gives the body an outlet for the energy that stress generates. Another important tool involves examining the thoughts that accompany stress. The brain often constructs narratives around stressful events. A small mistake becomes a catastrophic scenario. A minor problem transforms into a prediction of failure. These narratives amplify stress beyond what the situation actually requires. Learning to question these thoughts can reduce their power. Is this situation truly as dangerous as it feels? What evidence supports the worst-case scenario my mind is imagining? How would I advise a friend experiencing the same situation? These questions help shift the brain from reactive survival mode back toward rational analysis. There is also an emotional dimension to stress management that many people overlook. Perfectionism often fuels chronic stress. When individuals believe they must perform flawlessly at all times, even small imperfections trigger anxiety. The brain begins interpreting ordinary challenges as threats to identity. Releasing unrealistic expectations can significantly reduce the intensity of stress responses. Humans are not designed for constant perfection. They are designed for adaptation. Learning, growing, correcting mistakes, and continuing forward are natural parts of development. Stress loses much of its power when we stop interpreting every difficulty as a personal failure. Ultimately, stress is information. It is the brain's way of signaling that something requires attention. Sometimes the signal points toward genuine danger. Other times it indicates that you are carrying too many responsibilities, neglecting recovery, or interpreting situations through distorted assumptions. When you learn to listen to these signals rather than suppress them, stress becomes less overwhelming. It becomes guidance. Because the goal is not to remove all pressure from life. Challenge and growth often emerge from demanding circumstances. The goal is balance. Enough stress to energize action. Enough calm to sustain clarity. When the brain learns to move between these states fluidly, productivity improves, creativity returns, and emotional stability strengthens. Your mind becomes capable of handling complexity without collapsing under pressure. And once stress is managed, another powerful rule of the brain becomes visible. Because learning itself follows a pattern that most people misunderstand. A pattern built on something surprisingly simple. Repetition. Chapter 5. Repetition. How the brain builds memory. Have you ever had this experience? You read a powerful book. Every page feels meaningful. You highlight sentences, take notes, maybe even tell yourself that this insight will change how you live your life. In that moment, the ideas feel unforgettable. Yet weeks later, when someone asks about the book, you struggle to remember the details. You recall that it was inspiring. You might remember one or two general ideas, but the powerful insights that once felt transformative have faded. The same thing happens after seminars, workshops, or educational videos. While listening, everything feels clear and obvious. The concepts seem simple enough that you assume they will stay with you permanently. But time passes, new information arrives, and gradually the original insight disappears. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is simply how memory works. Your brain is not a storage device where information is permanently saved after a single exposure. Instead, it operates more like a living system that strengthens pathways through repeated experience. Every time you encounter new information, your brain forms a neural connection. Neurons fire together, creating a pathway through which that information can travel again later. But the first time this pathway forms, it is extremely fragile. Imagine walking through a dense forest for the first time. You push branches aside and step carefully between obstacles. When you leave, the forest quickly begins reclaiming the path. The next time you walk the same route, the path becomes slightly clearer. After many repetitions, the trail becomes easy to follow. Neural pathways form the same way. Each repetition strengthens the connection between neurons. Signals travel faster. The pathway becomes easier to activate. Eventually, the idea becomes automatic, something you recall effortlessly. Without repetition, the pathway fades. The brain constantly evaluates which information deserves long-term storage. If an idea appears only once and never returns, the brain assumes it is not important and allows the connection to weaken. This process is not a flaw. It is an efficiency system. Your brain receives enormous amounts of information every day. If it attempted to preserve every detail permanently, the system would become overloaded. Forgetting allows the brain to remain flexible and adaptive. But this also means that the ideas that shape your life must be reinforced intentionally. Repetition transforms information into knowledge. And knowledge, when repeated often enough, becomes instinct. Think about learning to drive a car. In the beginning, every action requires attention. You must consciously monitor the mirrors, control the pedals, shift gears, watch the road, and coordinate multiple movements at once. It feels overwhelming. Yet after enough repetition, these actions become automatic. Your brain has strengthened the neural circuits responsible for these skills. Driving becomes effortless because the pathways are deeply embedded. The same principle applies to every skill, belief, and habit. Whatever you repeat becomes stronger, and whatever becomes stronger begins shaping how you think and act. Yet modern culture often encourages the opposite approach to learning. Many people consume enormous amounts of information every day. Articles, podcasts, videos, courses, books, each one offering new insights and strategies. But instead of revisiting and integrating these ideas, they move quickly to the next source of information. The brain becomes overwhelmed by novelty. New ideas replace old ones before the previous ideas have had time to solidify. It is like planting seeds in soil and digging them up the next day to plant something else. Nothing has time to grow. This phenomenon is sometimes described as information addiction. The excitement of discovering something new produces a temporary sense of progress. But without repetition and application, the information dissolves. Real learning happens differently. Instead of constantly searching for new ideas, effective learners return to important concepts again and again. They reread material. They review notes. They reflect on how ideas apply to their own lives. Each repetition strengthens the neural pathway. Each review deepens understanding. There is a scientific principle called spaced repetition that illustrates this process clearly. Instead of reviewing information many times in a single session, it is far more effective to revisit the same idea at gradually increasing intervals. For example, learning something today, reviewing it tomorrow, then revisiting it a few days later, then again after a week. Each time the brain retrieves the information from memory, the neural pathway strengthens. This retrieval process forces the brain to reconstruct the idea, making the learning far more durable. But repetition can occur in many forms beyond simple review. Writing about an idea strengthens memory. Teaching it to someone else deepens comprehension. Discussing it in conversation reinforces the neural network associated with the concept. Even imagining how an idea applies to real-life situations strengthens retention. Each of these experiences activates the same neural circuits. Another powerful technique involves environmental cues. When important ideas appear repeatedly in your surroundings, the brain encounters them naturally throughout the day. A written insight on a piece of paper near your workspace, a reminder in your journal, or a phrase placed somewhere visible can gently reinforce an idea over time. These small reminders accumulate. Gradually, the concept becomes familiar, then intuitive, then automatic. But repetition requires patience. Modern culture often celebrates novelty. We are conditioned to believe that excitement comes from discovering something new. Repetition can feel boring by comparison. Yet mastery is built on repetition. Musicians practice scales thousands of times. Athletes repeat fundamental movements daily. Writers refine the same craft repeatedly through years of practice. What appears effortless from the outside is the result of countless repetitions that strengthened neural pathways until the behavior became natural. The same principle applies to your thinking patterns. If you repeat empowering beliefs and constructive habits, those pathways become dominant. If you repeatedly focus on negative thoughts or distractions, those pathways strengthen instead. Your brain does not judge what you repeat. It simply builds stronger circuits around whatever appears most frequently. So the question becomes simple. What ideas are you reinforcing daily? Because the thoughts you repeat today become the mental architecture of tomorrow. And once repetition begins shaping your internal landscape, another fascinating property of the brain becomes visible. Your brain does not only process information through words. In fact, its most powerful language is something far more visual. Chapter 6. Visuals, the brain's native language. Close your eyes for a moment and think about the house where you grew up. Notice what happens. You do not see sentences describing the house. You do not recall a written explanation of its structure. Instead, images appear almost instantly. The color of the walls, the position of the front door, the arrangement of furniture, maybe even the way sunlight entered through the windows. The picture forms effortlessly. Now try something different. Attempt to recall the exact words from a conversation you had yesterday. This task is much harder. You might remember the general topic, perhaps the emotional tone, but the precise sentences are difficult to reconstruct. This contrast reveals a fundamental truth about how your brain works. Your brain is designed to process images far more efficiently than words. Nearly half of the brain's neural resources are involved in visual processing. Visual information travels through specialized networks that interpret shape, color, movement, and spatial relationships with remarkable speed. When you see something, your brain can process it tens of thousands of times faster than reading a description of it. Because of this efficiency, visual information is also remembered more easily. Studies have shown that people remember a much larger percentage of visual material compared to information presented only in text or spoken language. Images anchor ideas in memory by creating rich neural associations. In other words, when you see something, your brain experiences it more fully. This principle influences everything from learning and creativity to problem-solving and decision-making. Yet many people rely almost entirely on words when organizing information. They write long lists. They record paragraphs of notes. They read page after page of explanations. While these methods can be useful, they often fail to engage the brain's most powerful processing system. Visual thinking activates that system. Imagine trying to understand a complex concept through text alone. A long explanation might describe relationships between different ideas, but following the structure requires effort. You must mentally construct a map of the information while reading. Now imagine the same concept represented visually. A simple diagram shows how the ideas connect. Arrows indicate relationships. Shapes group related components together. In seconds, the structure becomes clear. The visual format allows the brain to see the entire system at once, rather than assembling it piece by piece. This is why diagrams, maps, and sketches often clarify ideas that once felt confusing in written form. Visual thinking is not limited to artists or designers. It is a natural cognitive ability that everyone possesses. Even simple drawings can unlock new ways of understanding. Boxes, circles, arrows, and lines are often enough to represent complex relationships between ideas. One powerful technique for visual thinking is mind mapping. Instead of writing notes in a straight line, you place the central idea in the middle of a page. From that central point, branches extend outward, representing related concepts. Each branch may divide into smaller branches, forming a structure that resembles a tree. This format mirrors how the brain naturally organizes information. Ideas connect to other ideas through networks rather than through rigid sequences. By representing those connections visually, you allow the brain to process information more holistically. Another useful approach involves visual metaphors. Abstract ideas can become easier to understand when represented through images. Stress might be imagined as pressure building inside a container. Focus could be represented as a beam of light illuminating a single point. Time management might resemble a set of containers with limited capacity. These images translate complex concepts into forms that the brain recognizes instantly. Color can also enhance visual thinking. Different colors activate distinct neural responses and help categorize information quickly. By assigning colors to specific types of ideas, actions, warnings, priorities, you create visual patterns that guide attention naturally. When scanning your notes later, the colors immediately reveal the structure of the information without requiring you to read every word. Sketching can also become a powerful problem-solving tool. When faced with a complex challenge, many people attempt to analyze the situation internally using words. But externalizing the problem visually often reveals patterns that were previously hidden. Drawing the current situation, identifying obstacles, and mapping possible solutions onto paper transforms an abstract challenge into something concrete. The brain can then explore the relationships between elements more effectively. Visual goal setting uses a similar principle. Instead of writing a list of goals, imagine representing them visually. A timeline illustrating where you are today and where you want to be in the future. A board displaying images that represent aspirations and milestones. Even a simple chart mapping progress over time. These visual reminders keep your objectives present in your environment. The brain sees them repeatedly, reinforcing motivation and direction. Some people hesitate to adopt visual thinking because they believe they lack artistic skill. But artistic talent is irrelevant. Visual thinking is not about creating beautiful drawings. It is about representing information in a form the brain can process efficiently. Simple stick figures, arrows, and shapes are often more effective than elaborate illustrations because they are faster to create and easier to adjust. The goal is clarity, not perfection. Once you begin using visual methods regularly, you may notice something surprising. Ideas that once felt difficult to organize suddenly become easier to understand. Your memory improves because the images anchor information more strongly. Creative insights emerge more frequently because the brain can explore relationships between ideas visually. You begin thinking in pictures rather than only in words. This shift unlocks a different level of cognitive performance. Your brain is finally communicating in its native language, but understanding information visually is only part of the story, because knowledge alone does not produce action. What ultimately drives behavior is something far more powerful. Emotion. Chapter 7. Emotions, the fuel behind every action. Consider two different ways someone might describe the same goal. The first sounds like this: I should exercise more. It's good for my health. Studies show it improves cardiovascular function, increases lifespan, and reduces the risk of disease. Everything in that statement is logical. It is factually correct. The reasoning makes sense. Yet for many people, that knowledge alone is not enough to create consistent action. Now, consider a different version of the same goal. I want to feel strong in my body again. I want to have the energy to run with my children, to move without feeling exhausted, to wake up and feel proud of the person I see in the mirror. Both statements describe the same behavior: exercise. But the second version carries something the first does not. Emotion. Emotion is the hidden force behind nearly every human action. Logic may explain why something is beneficial, but emotion determines whether we actually do it. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of productivity and personal development. Many people believe that success depends primarily on discipline, rational planning, or willpower. But neuroscience reveals a different reality. The emotional centers of the brain play a critical role in decision-making. Deep within the brain lies the limbic system, a network of structures responsible for generating emotional responses. These regions interact constantly with the prefrontal cortex, which governs reasoning and planning. For a long time, scientists assumed these systems operated independently. Emotion was seen as the enemy of rational thinking. But research has shown that the opposite is true. Emotion and logic are partners in decision-making. In fact, individuals who suffer damage to emotional processing areas of the brain often struggle to make even simple decisions. They can analyze every logical possibility, yet they cannot choose between options because the emotional signals that assign importance to those choices are missing. Emotion provides the sense of meaning that guides action. Without it, logic becomes directionless. This explains why people often know what they should do, but fail to do it. They understand the logical benefits of a behavior, but the emotional connection is weak or negative. Take procrastination as an example. When someone avoids an important task, it is rarely because they lack information about its importance. More often, the task has become associated with uncomfortable emotions, such as anxiety, boredom, or fear of failure. The brain naturally avoids experiences linked with negative emotions. Even if the logical mind insists the task is necessary, the emotional system resists. To change behavior, the emotional association must change. A task connected with dread becomes difficult to start. The same task connected with curiosity or pride becomes easier to engage. Understanding this principle allows you to work with emotion rather than fighting against it. Instead of forcing yourself through sheer discipline, you can reshape the emotional meaning attached to your actions. One way to do this is by identifying the deeper reason behind your goals. Many goals begin as surface-level intentions. Someone might say they want to earn more money, achieve recognition, or complete a project. These motivations may appear practical, but beneath them often lies a deeper emotional driver. Perhaps the real desire is security, freedom, or the ability to support loved ones. Maybe it is the satisfaction of mastering a craft, or the pride that comes from overcoming challenges. When you connect your actions to these deeper emotional reasons, motivation becomes stronger. The brain begins interpreting the task not as an obligation, but as an expression of identity. Another technique involves reframing how you interpret challenges. The stories you tell yourself about events influence the emotions you experience. For example, imagine receiving criticism on your work. One interpretation might be, "I failed because I am not good enough." That story produces feelings of shame or discouragement. Another interpretation might be, "This feedback is information that helps me improve." That story produces curiosity and motivation. The event itself remains the same, but the emotional response changes based on the narrative you choose. This ability to reinterpret experiences is one of the brain's most powerful tools. By consciously selecting constructive interpretations, you influence the emotional signals that guide future behavior. Positive emotions can also be cultivated intentionally. Visualization is one method. When you imagine achieving a goal vividly, seeing the environment, feeling the satisfaction, experiencing the pride, your brain begins responding as if the outcome is already meaningful. This emotional rehearsal strengthens motivation. Music, movement, and social connection can also generate emotional states that support productivity. These experiences stimulate neurotransmitters such as dopamine and serotonin, creating feelings of engagement and enthusiasm. When the brain associates work with these positive emotions, starting tasks becomes easier. But emotional awareness also requires acknowledging difficult feelings. Suppressing emotions does not eliminate them. Unprocessed stress, disappointment, or frustration continues influencing behavior beneath conscious awareness. Taking time to process these emotions through reflection, conversation, or physical activity allows the nervous system to release tension. Clarity returns once emotional weight has been acknowledged. The goal is not to eliminate emotion from your life or work. The goal is alignment. When your emotional energy supports your goals instead of resisting them, motivation flows naturally. The most successful individuals are not emotionless machines, driven only by logic. They are people who understand their emotional landscape and learn to direct it toward meaningful pursuits. Emotion becomes fuel rather than interference. Once you begin working with this fuel, you discover something interesting. Even powerful emotions require balance. Too much intensity can exhaust the mind just as easily as too little motivation. This brings us to another essential principle of brain performance. The brain, like any powerful system, cannot operate continuously without rest. Breaks are not interruptions to productivity. They are the conditions that make sustained productivity possible. Chapter 8. Breaks, the power of productive pause. Imagine this situation. You sit down to work with determination. You tell yourself that today you will be highly productive. No distractions, no wasted time, just pure effort. The first hour goes well. Your attention is steady. Progress feels satisfying. By the second hour, concentration begins to slip slightly. You reread sentences more often. Small mistakes appear. Your posture shifts as fatigue slowly creeps in. But you ignore the signals. You tell yourself to keep pushing. By the third hour, something changes. You are still sitting at your desk, still looking at your screen, but the quality of your thinking has dropped dramatically. You read the same lines repeatedly without understanding them. Tasks that should take minutes stretch into long, frustrating attempts. Eventually, the day ends. You spent many hours working, yet the results feel disappointing. This experience leads many people to believe they simply need stronger discipline. They assume the solution is to push harder, stay longer, and force productivity through sheer effort. But biology tells a different story. The brain is not designed for continuous concentration. Human cognitive performance operates in natural cycles. These cycles, known as ultradian rhythms, typically last around 90 minutes. During this period, the brain can maintain high levels of focus and mental effort. After that cycle ends, the brain requires recovery. If the recovery period is ignored, cognitive performance begins to decline. Attention weakens, creativity decreases, decision-making becomes slower, errors increase. Continuing to push through this decline does not restore productivity. It accelerates exhaustion. Think of the brain as a muscle. When you exercise a muscle intensely, it eventually reaches a point of fatigue. Continuing to strain the muscle without rest does not make it stronger. It increases the risk of injury and reduces performance. The brain functions in a similar way. Mental effort consumes energy in the form of glucose and oxygen. Neural circuits responsible for focus gradually become fatigued. Without periods of rest, the brain struggles to maintain the same level of performance. Breaks allow these systems to recover. During a break, the brain does not simply shut down. Instead, it shifts into a different mode of activity known as the default mode network. This network becomes active when your attention is no longer directed toward a specific task. While you walk, relax, or let your mind wander, the brain begins organizing information gathered during focused work. Memories consolidate, patterns emerge, creative connections form between ideas that previously seemed unrelated. This is why many people experience sudden insights during moments of rest. Ideas appear while walking outside, taking a shower, or lying quietly before sleep. These moments are not random bursts of creativity. They are the result of the brain processing information in the background. Rest allows deeper cognitive integration. Unfortunately, modern culture often misinterprets rest as laziness. Productivity is frequently measured by hours spent working rather than by the quality of output. People feel guilty for stepping away from their desks, even when their minds are clearly fatigued. But the most effective thinkers understand something important. Breaks are not the opposite of productivity. They are an essential component of it. Short pauses during work sessions can dramatically improve concentration and creativity. Even a few minutes of stepping away from a task allows neural circuits to reset. Physical movement during breaks amplifies this effect. Walking, stretching, or simply changing posture increases blood flow and oxygen delivery to the brain. Nature exposure also enhances recovery. Looking at trees, sky, or natural landscapes can reduce stress hormones and restore attention. This restorative effect occurs surprisingly quickly. A brief walk outside can refresh the brain far more effectively than continuing to stare at a screen. Mindful breathing is another powerful form of restorative break. Slow, intentional breathing calms the nervous system and helps shift the brain from stress responses into a balanced state. These small practices signal safety to the brain. When the nervous system relaxes, cognitive performance improves. One of the most effective strategies for managing focus and rest is structuring work in cycles. Instead of attempting to work continuously for long periods, divide your work into blocks of focused effort, followed by intentional breaks. A common pattern involves approximately 90 minutes of concentrated work, followed by 15 or 20 minutes of rest. During the focus period, distractions are minimized and attention is directed toward a single task. During the break, the mind is allowed to disengage completely. This rhythm mirrors the brain's natural energy cycles. Working with these cycles, rather than resisting them, creates a sustainable pattern of productivity. Another important principle is taking breaks before exhaustion appears. If you wait until you feel completely drained, recovery becomes more difficult. Scheduled breaks prevent cognitive fatigue from accumulating. Just as athletes hydrate before they feel thirsty, effective thinkers rest before they feel exhausted. It is also important to recognize that not all breaks are equal. Scrolling through social media or checking email during a break does not provide true recovery. These activities continue stimulating the brain and may even introduce new stressors. A restorative break involves disengaging from the mental effort that produced fatigue. Movement, relaxation, or quiet reflection allow the brain to shift into recovery mode. Even longer periods of rest play an important role in mental performance. Sleep restores neural systems overnight. Days away from intense work allow deeper cognitive recovery. These longer cycles prevent burnout and support sustained creativity. Many breakthroughs occur after extended periods of rest because the brain finally has the space to reorganize information fully. When rest becomes part of your routine, rather than an occasional escape from exhaustion, productivity transforms. Work becomes more focused. Energy remains stable. Creativity flows more naturally. Instead of forcing effort until collapse, you learn to move between focus and recovery in a rhythm that supports long-term performance. The result is not simply more productivity. It is sustainable productivity. You accomplish meaningful work without sacrificing your mental clarity or emotional well-being. And once you understand how rest supports performance, the final step becomes clear. Because knowing these principles is not enough. Transformation only happens when knowledge becomes habit. Chapter 9. Integration, from knowledge to transformation. You now understand the principles. Sleep restores the brain. Movement activates it. Focus directs its power. Stress must be regulated. Repetition strengthens learning. Visual thinking clarifies complexity. Emotion fuels action. Breaks restore energy. Each rule reveals something important about how the mind operates. But there is a critical truth that separates knowledge from transformation. Understanding these rules does not automatically change your life. Many people read books, attend seminars, watch lectures, and feel inspired for a short time. They recognize the wisdom in the ideas. They imagine how different their lives could become. Then, the moment passes. Daily routines return. Old habits quietly reappear. Weeks later, the ideas fade into memory without ever becoming reality. This gap between knowing and doing is where most change fails. The brain does not transform through information alone. It transforms through consistent behavior repeated over time. Knowledge provides direction. Habit creates results. When you repeatedly act in ways that align with these brain rules, the neural circuits supporting those behaviors strengthen. Gradually, the actions become easier. Eventually, they feel automatic. The mind adapts to the patterns you practice. Trying to implement every rule simultaneously often leads to frustration. The brain resists large, sudden changes because they require enormous cognitive energy. Sustainable transformation begins with something much smaller. Choose one principle. Just one. Identify the rule that resonates most strongly with your current situation. Perhaps you struggle with sleep. Perhaps focus has been difficult. Maybe stress dominates your daily experience. Whatever the area may be, start there. Observe your current behavior for a few days, without judgment. Notice when the habit appears and what triggers it. This observation phase builds awareness, which is the foundation of change. Then introduce a small adjustment. If sleep is the goal, begin by moving your bedtime slightly earlier. If focus is the goal, create a short window of uninterrupted work. If movement is the goal, add a brief walk to your day. The change does not need to be dramatic. In fact, small changes are often more powerful because they are easier to sustain. When the brain successfully repeats a new behavior several times, confidence grows. The action begins feeling familiar. Resistance decreases. Over time, these small adjustments accumulate. This process is sometimes called the compound effect. Just as small financial investments grow through compounding interest, small behavioral improvements accumulate into significant transformation. One additional factor plays an important role in sustaining change. Environment. Your surroundings constantly influence your behavior, often without your awareness. A phone placed next to your bed invites late-night scrolling. A cluttered workspace encourages distraction. A quiet environment supports concentration. Designing your environment intentionally can make new habits easier to maintain. If you want better sleep, create a calm and dark sleeping space. If you want deeper focus, remove unnecessary distractions from your workspace. If you want regular exercise, place equipment or reminders where they are visible. Environment shapes behavior by reducing friction. The easier a positive action becomes, the more likely you are to repeat it. Social influence also affects habit formation. Humans are deeply responsive to the behaviors of those around them. If your environment includes people who value health, focus, and personal growth, those behaviors become easier to adopt. Supportive communities reinforce positive habits through shared expectations. Finally, patience is essential. True change rarely happens overnight. Neural pathways require time to strengthen. Setbacks will occur. Some days will feel easier than others. What matters most is consistency. Each time you return to the habit after a setback, you reinforce the identity of someone committed to growth. Over months and years, these small, repeated actions reshape the brain's operating patterns. Eventually, the behaviors that once required effort begin feeling natural. You become someone who sleeps well, moves regularly, focuses deeply, manages stress wisely, and balances effort with recovery. The transformation is gradual, but profound. The person you become through these habits is not someone new. It is simply the version of you that emerges when the brain is supported rather than neglected. And this realization leads to a powerful conclusion. The potential you have been searching for has always existed within you. It was never a matter of lacking intelligence or motivation. It was simply a matter of understanding how your mind works. Once you begin aligning your life with these natural rules, something remarkable happens. Clarity increases, energy stabilizes, focus deepens, creativity expands. You stop fighting against your own biology and begin working with it. And when the brain receives the conditions it needs to thrive, your capacity to think, create, and act becomes far greater than you once believed possible. The question now is not whether these principles work. The question is whether you will begin applying them. Because transformation does not begin with reading. It begins with the next action you choose to take. Chapter 10. Environment, the invisible architect of behavior. There is a powerful force shaping your behavior every single day. Most people never notice it. They believe their success or failure comes down to discipline. They assume productivity depends on motivation. They think the difference between people who build meaningful lives and those who stay stuck is simply willpower. But there is another factor working quietly beneath all of that. Your environment. Look around you right now. The room you are sitting in, the objects on your desk, the sounds in the background, the screen in front of you, the phone within arm's reach. Each of these elements sends signals to your brain, signals that tell it what kind of behavior is expected in this moment. Human beings like to imagine themselves as rational decision makers, carefully choosing every action through conscious thought. But the brain is far more automatic than we often realize. Much of our behavior is triggered by cues in our surroundings. When your phone vibrates, your attention moves toward it almost instantly. When a television is on, your eyes drift toward the screen. When food sits on the table, your brain begins preparing to eat. These reactions happen quickly because the brain evolved to respond to environmental cues. For most of human history, paying attention to surroundings was essential for survival. Our ancestors lived in environments filled with signals that indicated danger, opportunity, or resources. The rustling of leaves might signal a predator. The sight of fruit on a tree meant food. The sound of running water meant survival. The brain learned to react immediately to what it saw around it. That ancient system still exists today. But the modern environment is very different. Instead of natural cues, our surroundings are filled with engineered signals designed to capture attention. Notifications, advertisements, digital alerts, bright colors, and endless streams of information all compete for the same biological response. Your brain reacts to these signals the same way it once reacted to survival cues in the wild. It turns toward them automatically. This is why distraction feels so powerful. It is not because you lack discipline. It is because your environment constantly invites your brain to shift focus. Consider something simple. Place a smartphone on a desk beside someone working. Even if the phone remains silent, the brain still registers its presence. Part of your attention remains subtly aware of the possibility that the device might light up, vibrate, or produce a message. Researchers have discovered that even a silent phone nearby can reduce cognitive capacity. Your brain allocates energy toward monitoring potential signals. In other words, distraction does not require active interruption. The possibility of interruption is enough. Now imagine a different environment, a workspace where the phone is in another room. Notifications are disabled. Only the tools required for the current task are visible. The lighting is calm. The noise level is minimal. Suddenly, focus becomes easier. Not because your brain changed, because the environment changed. This principle reveals something powerful about behavior. Success is rarely the result of heroic willpower. More often, it is the result of intelligent environment design. Instead of fighting your surroundings every day, you arrange them in ways that naturally support the behaviors you want. For example, imagine trying to read more books while constantly surrounded by screens. Every device competes for attention. Bright lights, moving images, and endless content trigger dopamine responses in the brain. Compared to that stimulation, reading can initially feel slow. But place a book on your bedside table. Remove your phone from the room at night. Suddenly, reading becomes the easiest available activity. The environment quietly guides the behavior. The same logic applies to productivity. A cluttered workspace often produces a cluttered mind. Every object in your visual field becomes a small signal, demanding attention. Papers, devices, unfinished tasks, all of them compete for cognitive space. Clearing your environment creates mental clarity. The brain can focus more easily when fewer signals compete for attention. Environment also influences emotional states. Natural light improves mood and alertness. Fresh air increases oxygen flow to the brain. Even small elements such as plants or open space can reduce stress and increase cognitive performance. These environmental factors shape how your nervous system responds to the day. There is also a deeper layer to this principle. The environments you choose determine the behaviors that feel normal. Spend enough time in a gym, and physical training becomes part of everyday life. Work in a quiet library, and concentration feels natural. Surround yourself with creative individuals, and new ideas appear constantly. Humans adapt to the expectations of their surroundings. This means the environments you inhabit are not neutral. They are shaping your identity. If you spend most of your time in environments designed for distraction, your brain will gradually adopt distracted patterns of thinking. But if you build environments that encourage focus, creativity, and growth, your brain begins adapting to those expectations instead. You do not need to redesign your entire life overnight. Small changes can produce powerful results. Place important tools where they are easy to access. Remove distractions from your workspace. Choose physical spaces that support deep thinking rather than constant interruption. These adjustments may seem simple, but over time, they transform behavior. Because when the environment supports your goals, discipline becomes easier, focus becomes natural, and the brain stops wasting energy fighting unnecessary battles. Instead, it begins doing what it was designed to do. Think clearly, create freely, and move steadily toward the life you intend to build. Chapter 11. Identity, the root of every habit. Most people try to change their lives by changing their goals. They create plans. They write resolutions. They promise themselves that tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow they will wake up earlier. Tomorrow they will focus harder. Tomorrow they will finally become the person they know they could be. And for a few days, sometimes even a few weeks, the effort works. Motivation appears. Energy feels strong. Progress begins. But eventually something happens. The excitement fades. Old patterns return. And people start asking themselves a painful question. Why do I keep going back to the same habits? The answer often has nothing to do with discipline. It has to do with identity. Every human being carries an internal story about who they are. This story may not always be spoken out loud, but it shapes behavior constantly. It influences how you interpret challenges, how you react to setbacks, and what actions feel natural or uncomfortable. Some people carry identities such as, I'm the kind of person who always finishes what I start. Others carry identities like, I'm terrible at staying consistent. These beliefs may seem like simple descriptions of behavior, but in reality, they act as powerful psychological anchors. Your brain constantly tries to behave in ways that are consistent with your identity. If you believe you are someone who struggles with discipline, your brain unconsciously searches for evidence to confirm that belief. Missed deadlines, unfinished tasks, moments of distraction, all of them reinforce the story. But if you believe you are someone who values focus, persistence, and growth, your brain begins reinforcing a different pattern. You start noticing moments when you behave according to that identity, and those moments strengthen the belief. Identity becomes a self-reinforcing loop. Behavior confirms belief. Belief encourages behavior. This loop explains why habits are so difficult to change. Many people try to modify behavior while keeping the same identity. For example, someone may attempt to exercise regularly while still believing deep down, I'm just not the kind of person who sticks to routines. The behavior and the identity conflict with each other. Eventually, the identity wins. But something remarkable happens when identity begins shifting first. Instead of saying, I'm trying to exercise, someone might say, I'm becoming the kind of person who takes care of my body. This subtle change transforms the goal. Exercise is no longer just an activity. It becomes an expression of identity. Every workout becomes proof of who you are becoming. This principle applies to every habit. When you write consistently, you reinforce the identity of a writer. When you read regularly, you reinforce the identity of a learner. When you protect your attention and work deeply, you reinforce the identity of someone capable of focus. Each small action becomes a vote. One vote alone does not define the outcome, but thousands of small votes eventually determine the result. This is why small habits matter so much. Many people underestimate small actions because they appear insignificant in isolation. Reading 10 pages, writing for 20 minutes, taking a short walk, practicing a skill for half an hour. Individually, these actions seem small, but each repetition casts another vote for the identity you are building. Over time, the brain begins believing the story those actions tell. The identity becomes stronger. Eventually, behavior stops requiring constant effort. It begins feeling natural. A person who truly sees themselves as a reader does not struggle to open a book. A person who identifies as an athlete does not debate whether to exercise. The behavior flows from the identity. There is also an important psychological advantage in focusing on identity rather than outcomes. Goals are temporary. Once you achieve a goal, the motivation behind it often disappears. Someone who sets the goal of running a marathon may train intensely until the race is finished. Afterward, the behavior may fade because the goal has been completed. But identity has no finish line. A runner continues running because it is part of who they are. A creator continues creating because the activity expresses their identity. Identity produces consistency. Consistency produces mastery. This is the deeper mechanism behind lasting transformation. You do not become disciplined by forcing yourself through endless struggle. You become disciplined by gradually becoming the type of person who values disciplined behavior. The change begins quietly, with small actions repeated often. Each action sends a signal to the brain. This is who I am becoming. Eventually, the signal grows strong enough that the brain accepts it as truth. Once that happens, something interesting occurs. The behaviors that once felt difficult start feeling obvious, because they are no longer tasks. They are expressions of identity. And when identity aligns with your goals, progress becomes far more sustainable. You are no longer fighting against yourself. You are simply acting like the person you have decided to become. Chapter 12. Attention, the most valuable resource on earth. There is a silent competition happening around you every moment of the day. You cannot see it. You rarely think about it. Yet it influences nearly everything you do. It is the competition for your attention. In the modern world, attention has become one of the most valuable resources on the planet. Entire industries are built around capturing it, holding it, and converting it into influence or profit. Every application you open, every website you visit, every platform you scroll through, all of them are designed with one primary goal: to keep your eyes there as long as possible. This is not accidental. Behind every notification, every autoplay video, every endless scroll feature, there are teams of engineers and psychologists studying how the brain responds to stimulation. They study what triggers curiosity. They measure what keeps people engaged. They experiment with colors, sounds, and timing to find the exact signals that cause the brain to return again and again. These systems work because they tap into ancient neurological mechanisms. Your brain evolved in environments where novelty mattered. A new sound might signal danger. A new object might signal opportunity. A new piece of information could mean survival. Because of this, the brain developed powerful reward systems that activate whenever we encounter something new or unexpected. Dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with motivation and reward, increases when we discover novel information. Modern technology has learned to exploit this system. Every swipe, every refresh, every notification introduces the possibility of something new. A new message, a new post, a new video, a new piece of information. The brain begins anticipating the reward before it even arrives. This anticipation keeps attention locked onto the screen. But there is a hidden cost to this constant stimulation. When the brain receives frequent bursts of novelty, its tolerance for sustained focus decreases. Tasks that require deep concentration, reading, writing, problem-solving, studying, begin to feel unusually difficult. Not because they are inherently difficult, but because the brain has been conditioned to expect constant stimulation. Instead of staying with one idea for long periods, attention begins jumping rapidly between different sources. A message appears, a notification interrupts, another tab opens, another piece of content appears. This constant switching fragments cognitive energy. The brain spends more time shifting attention than actually thinking deeply. Researchers have found that after an interruption, it can take many minutes for the brain to fully return to the original level of concentration. When interruptions occur repeatedly throughout the day, deep focus becomes rare, and deep focus is where the most meaningful work happens. Creative breakthroughs, complex problem solving, learning new skills, developing original ideas. All of these require sustained attention. Without it, thinking remains shallow. The attention economy therefore creates an unusual paradox. The tools that promise to make us more connected and informed, can also make it harder to think clearly. The challenge of modern life is not simply accessing information. It is protecting attention. Individuals who learn to direct their attention deliberately gain a powerful advantage in a world filled with distraction, because attention is the gateway through which every thought enters the mind. Where your attention goes, your mental life follows. If your attention is constantly scattered, your thinking becomes scattered. If your attention remains focused, your thinking becomes powerful. Protecting attention does not require rejecting technology entirely, but it does require boundaries. Turning off unnecessary notifications, limiting the number of platforms competing for your time, creating environments where focused work is possible without constant interruption. Some of the most productive thinkers intentionally create periods where their attention cannot be easily captured. Phones are placed in another room. Internet access is restricted during deep work sessions. Schedules include protected blocks of uninterrupted concentration. These practices are not extreme. They are protective. They defend the most valuable cognitive resource you possess, your ability to direct attention intentionally. When attention is protected, something remarkable happens. The brain begins slowing down. Ideas have time to develop. Thoughts connect in deeper ways. Instead of reacting to endless external signals, the mind begins generating original insight. Clarity replaces noise. Purpose replaces distraction. In many ways, the future will belong to individuals who can master this skill, not because they have access to more information, but because they have learned how to filter it. The ability to sustain attention may become one of the rarest abilities in the modern world, and therefore one of the most valuable. Because when you can direct your attention deliberately, you regain control of the most powerful tool you possess, your mind. And once you regain control of attention, you are ready to integrate everything you have learned, all the rules, all the insights, all the patterns that shape how your brain truly works. The final step is bringing them together into a way of living that supports clarity, focus, and growth. And that is exactly where we go next. Conclusion. The brain you were meant to use at the beginning of this journey, you were asked to imagine something simple: waking up with a clear mind, not groggy, not overwhelmed, not already exhausted before the day even begins. Just calm, focused energy, and the quiet confidence that your mind is ready to work with you instead of against you. For many people, that image feels distant, almost unrealistic. They assume that kind of mental clarity belongs only to highly disciplined individuals or people with unusual natural ability. But now, you understand something important. That version of you is not a fantasy. It is simply the result of operating your brain the way it was designed to function. Everything you explored in these chapters points back to one central truth. Your brain follows natural laws. When those laws are respected, the mind becomes remarkably capable. When they are ignored, even simple tasks begin to feel difficult. Sleep restores the neural systems that allow clear thinking. Movement activates the chemical processes that sharpen attention. Focused work allows deep cognitive performance. Stress management protects the brain from survival mode. Repetition strengthens memory and learning. Visual thinking clarifies complex ideas. Emotion energizes meaningful action. Breaks allow the brain to recover and integrate information. None of these principles are mysterious. They are not exclusive secrets possessed by a few high performers. They are basic operating instructions for the most sophisticated tool you will ever own. Yet most people spend their entire lives without receiving this instruction manual. They attempt to force productivity through exhaustion. They fight against distraction without understanding attention. They blame themselves for lack of discipline when the real issue is biological misalignment. But the moment you begin working with your brain instead of against it, something changes. Effort becomes more effective. Tasks that once required enormous energy begin to feel manageable. Ideas connect more easily. Emotional stability improves because the nervous system is no longer operating under constant strain. You begin experiencing a different relationship with your own mind, not control through force, but cooperation through understanding. There is also an important decision waiting at this point. Knowledge alone changes nothing. Many people encounter valuable ideas, feel inspired for a moment, and then continue living exactly as before. Information fades when it is not translated into action. The difference between knowing and transforming lies in behavior. You do not need to implement every rule immediately. In fact, attempting to change everything at once usually leads to frustration. Instead, begin with a single habit. Choose the rule that resonates most strongly with your life right now. Perhaps sleep is the area needing attention. Maybe your focus has been fragmented. Perhaps stress has quietly taken control of your nervous system. Whatever the case may be, begin there. Start small. Move your bedtime slightly earlier. Take a short walk each day. Create a small window of uninterrupted focus. Pause for a few minutes when stress rises. These actions may appear insignificant, but repeated consistently, they reshape neural pathways. Day by day, the brain adapts to the patterns you create. The habits that once required effort gradually become natural. Your mind begins operating with greater stability, clarity, and resilience. Months later, you may look back and realize something subtle has shifted. Your thinking feels sharper. Your energy lasts longer throughout the day. Problems that once felt overwhelming now appear manageable. You have not become a different person. You have simply allowed your brain to function the way it was designed to. And once that alignment happens, your potential expands naturally. The productivity you were chasing becomes easier. Creativity emerges without constant forcing. Focus deepens because the conditions supporting it are finally present. In other words, you stop struggling against yourself. Your brain becomes an ally instead of an obstacle. Before you move on with your day, consider one final question. What is the smallest action you can take in the next 24 hours that supports your brain's natural design? It might be going to bed earlier tonight, taking a short walk after finishing this chapter, turning off notifications during a focused work session, or simply pausing for a few moments of quiet breathing when stress begins to rise. One small action. That is all it takes to begin. Because transformation rarely arrives through dramatic moments. It emerges from small, consistent decisions repeated over time. Every time you align your habits with how your brain truly works, you strengthen the foundation of your future, and eventually you reach a point where these behaviors are no longer strategies. They are simply how you live. Your mind becomes clearer. Your energy becomes steadier. Your actions become more intentional. Not because you forced yourself to change, but because you finally understood the system you have been using your entire life. Your brain has always been ready to support you. Now you know how to support it in return. The next step is yours. Thank you for listening with an open mind and heart. If a certain chapter or insight resonated most with you, share it in the comments. You might help someone else find exactly what they need today. Keep this book saved so you can return to its words whenever life calls for reflection or guidance. I wish you health, peace, and wisdom in every step you take.